By cleaning data, I mean changing names, making new variables, adding more data, all those things that you have to do before you actually analysing the data. Don't be surprised if this part of the analysis takes a really long time. It's usually about two-thirds of your time just getting your data ready to analyse. If you've watched the video previous to this, you'll understand that we downloaded some files from the VLE. So this is the VLE, and you can see we've got a do file here, a dataset, and another dataset here. And what we did is we saved them into our C drive under a folder called STATA Workshop. That meant that when we went to open up STATA, so I'm going to scroll down to S, open up STATA, we can then open up a do file. And it's there like that. What we did in the first video is we set our working directory. So I'm going to highlight this, press Ctrl D, and then STATA knows where to look when I import my Excel data file. We also browsed it, looked at it, and described it and listed it. So now we're on to cleaning data. First thing we're going to do is rename a variable. Let's just say we've got this variable called debt GDP ratio, and that's a little bit clumsy, that name. So we just want to rename it to ratio. We use a command called rename, write out the name of the variable we want to change, and then write out the new name. So in STATA, I think I've opened up STATA twice, let me close that. There we go. We've got our do file. You can see there we've got a variable called debt GDP ratio. If I highlight this command, you can see that it's changed the name to ratio now. Another thing we can do is change the labels in STATA. So each variable has a name, but it also has a label. And the label defaults to just the variable name if we don't give it another label. That's what's happened in our case because we've read in our data from an Excel file. If you read it in from, say, an SPSS file where they have labels, then it would use the label from SPSS. So what we do to change the label, we say label variable as a command, and then we put in the name of the variable that we want to change, and then we put in the text that we want to change that variable to. We've done this for all the variables, so what I want you to do is run those commands in the do file to change the labels. And note what we've done here is we've not written out variable all the time, we've shortened it to VAR, and STATA is really good with that, being able to shorten the commands. It means that you can type them faster. So let's go back to STATA and our do file. And here you've got label variable country, and I want you to just look at this variable up here. Here's the name. The label's currently just the same word, just country. If we highlight that, Control D, now we can see that the label has changed. What we can do, instead of going through each one of them, we can highlight all of them. Control D, and it changes them all in a oneer. Much faster. Another thing you might want to do is replace a value. So let's just say there's a mistake in it or something. In this case, if you looked under the GDP variable for the UK, you'd notice that that value is missing. And STATA denotes that by just using a little full stop. So let's browse the data to check that. I'm going to click on my browse here. I'm not sure if you can see this because it's a bit small. Let me see if I can just make that a bit bigger. There we go. And here, so we've got country here in GDP. If we scroll down there in alphabetical order to the United Kingdom, there you can see we've got a missing value. And it's that value we want to infill, if you like. Let's close down browse. So if we want to change this from a dot to a number, we're going to use the replace command. So we write replace, then we tell it what variable the value is that we want to replace. And we're going to say that the value we want in that variable is 2631.23, which is the GDP for United Kingdom. Now, if we just stopped our command at that point, it would enter this value all the way down that variable GDP. So instead what we're going to do is we're going to give it an if condition. So that's what this command if is doing. And we're going to say only put in that value in the GDP variable if in the country variable it's equal to United Kingdom. So this is where we have to be quite accurate in our spelling. We've got to make sure that it actually says United Kingdom and not UK, for example. So let's go to STATA and run that command, and then we can check to see if it's worked. So here's our replace GDP if the country is equal to United Kingdom. And then we can browse our data, and there we go, we've got it filled in there. So we've checked that that works. Other thing we're going to do is create new variables. So in this will depend what your analysis is, but let's just say that we wanted a variable where the countries were coded as either non-European or European countries. So we want that variable to have a 0 for the countries that are non-European and a 1 for the countries that are European. The way we're going to do that is first off create a new column, a new variable, give it a name and fill it in with zeros. And then we're going to say fill it in with a 1 if the word under the region column is Europe. So let's do that in STATA. First of all, I'm going to create a variable. So this command generate we're going to be using quite a lot. We're going to name the variable European, and we want to say just fill it in with zeros. If I run that, and then I'll show you the data. At the end of our data here, we've got a column and it's zeros all the way down. Then when I run the next command in my do file, I'm saying, right, replace under this European with a 1 if in the region variable it's equal to Europe. And if we go back to our browse file, we can see that we've got some 1s in there. So let's just check the second and third one are European countries. Yep, Austria and Belgium. So that seems to have worked. We can use this generate and replace to code up a variable as well. What I mean by that is sometimes you want a new variable which contain codes for a string variable. A string variable, remember, is something that's written out in words. So for example, let's just say we want to have a 1 for all the European countries, a 2 for all the Asian countries, and etc, etc. So we're going to use this generate command again. We've done that thing where we've abbreviated it though. STATA allows you to abbreviate generate to GEN, just gen. We're going to name the variable region code, and when we do that, we just want that variable to be filled with dots, like missing data. After, we can then start to fill it in, so replace these missing values with whatever number we want if under the region variable it's equal to Europe, and so on and so forth. Let's go to STATA and do that. I'll generate that region code variable. Let's go into the data and just take a look to see what that's done. So there you go, you've got missing values column and you've got a new column called region code. Let's get our do file up again. And then I'll just do this one by one to begin with to show you what it does. So we've replaced all of these are the European countries. We've got most of them are European countries. Then if we run the next line in the do file, we should get a 2 for any Asian countries. You can see in here it tells you how many real changes, it calls them, are made. So presumably we've got 3 Asian countries in. Let's see. There we go. We've got one there. One there. Can't see the other one. I'm sure it's there though. Let's just see number 18. Oh yeah, there's Japan. So I'm confident my code's working. So what I'm going to do is just highlight all these at once. Control D. Check again. Yeah, that looks good. We don't have any missing values. They're all coded up. Something else you might want to do is make a label which contains all the values when you've done a coding. And that can be really useful because in your output, if you just have numbers 1 to 5, you don't know which number is which country unless you've written it down on a piece of paper or you're organised or something. So to demonstrate why that's useful, I'm going to get you to make a table of region code. So if we do the command table and this variable here, you'll see what happens. There we go. We've got the region code 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we've got how many countries are in each of those regions. But we don't necessarily remember which one is which, and we'd have that problem when we start analysing our data. So one thing we could do is add a value label. The way to do that is to define a label and then add it. So think of it as a 2-step process. We use the command label define. We give that label a name. So I've just called it my value label. I could have called it anything, it doesn't really matter. And then I've put what codes mean what. Just leaving spaces between the number, the code, and the region. And then we say label values for the variable region code, use my value label. So it has to be, those pieces of that command have to be in that order. And then when we make a table again, you'll see the benefit of doing that. So first off, let's make a label. You won't necessarily see anything change when we do that, but we have told STATA what we mean by my value label. And now we're going to add that to this region code that we've made. We should, if we click on region code, see that the value label has my value label under that box there. Now, when we do a table of a region code, it will make a lot more sense. So now we've got the names. So that's a lot more useful compared to that. The other thing you can do is use a command called encode, and that does the work for you. It does it automatically if you like. So we write the command encode, we tell it what variable we want to encode. So in our case, it's the region that we want to put into numbers. And then we say that we want to generate a variable using those codes and give that variable a name. We've already got a variable where we've coded it up, so I'm just going to create another variable called region code 2. Region code 2 is, we'll have a look and we'll see that the data type is listed as long, and long is a type of number, type of integer. So that's useful because then STATA will treat this variable as a number. It's useful to know because in some analyses you might not want it treated as a number, you might want it as a category. So let's just demonstrate that. This is just an alternative way to create a numbers variable from a string variable. Run the encode. And you'll see here we've got region code. I'm going to go to browse to show you the difference between them. Here we go. This is the one we did before, and this is the one that we've just done. If we highlight that, let's just go here, and you can see that region code, it's calling as a float, and region code 2, it's calling as long. They're both types of numbers. Close that. Another thing we can do is use the command total. Let's just say, I don't know why you'd want to do this, but this is just to demonstrate STATA. Let's just say you want to calculate the total debt of all these countries. Now the reason I've included this in this workshop is because some people might try to use the command sum because that's what you use in Excel. In STATA, use the command total. That'll give you a total of a variable. So here we're just totaling up everyone's debt, all those countries' debt. And then maybe we would want to use that in some sort of calculation to create a new variable. So imagine that we wanted to create a new variable which calculated the percentage of each debt for each country into a new variable. What we would do is use this generate command again, this gen command. We'd give our new variable a name, so I've just called it debt percent, and then we tell it what we want that variable to contain. So here I suppose you can call this a mathematical equation, a little sum. I want you to take whatever number is in that debt column for each country, divide it by, this is our total debt you'll see, times it by 100 so that we get a percentage. So I'll show you what that looks like in STATA. To calculate a total debt, it'll just print it for us. So, it gives us a standard error as well, just in case we need it. So there we go, we've got 45498.86. So then we could use that number in our formula here to calculate this debt percent variable. So you're about to see this debt percent variable being added at the bottom here. Run that, and there you go, you've got a new variable there. I'll show you that in the view of the data. That's all the debt as a percentage. So that was us where we just used information from one variable to create another. But quite commonly you need to use information from more than one variable to create a new variable. You can use criteria to select that information. So for instance, let's just say, again, don't know why you want to do this, but just to demonstrate the software, let's just say you want to use that information in region, so you want to know whether a country is in Europe or not. But you also want to know whether a country's GDP is above or below 1,000 million. And we want to know that information because we want to have this column where you have a 1 if a country is European and it has a GDP above 1,000 million, a 2 if a country is European and the GDP is below 1,000 million, and then we just want a 3 for other countries. The one way we could do that is we could generate a new variable called GDP Europe, and we'll put all countries to have a number of 3 initially. Then we'll start infilling numbers 1 and 2. So we're going to say replace that variable GDP Europe with a 1 if under the region variable that equals Europe, and under the GDP variable it's greater than 1,000. So notice here that we can use a double equal sign if the data is string, and we can use a mathematical greater than or less than sign if the data is numeric, and we can also, we're using a and sign to list the 2 variables that we want to take note of. So let's generate that initial column, check that's worked. There we go, we've got a 3 all the way down. Then replace that column with a 1 if the region's Europe and the GDP is greater than 1,000, and replace that column with 2 if the region's Europe but their GDP is less than 1,000. Go into browse, and you can see that we've got some 1s and 2s in there as well. Another common thing when you're handling data is you might get more data and want to merge the datasets, as it were. So you can add datasets to the dataset that's already in STATA. Think of it like that. Now there's a couple of commands that you might find useful. Append is a command used when you've got more rows at the bottom. So for example, let's just say that we want to add more countries to our dataset. We want to add more rows at the bottom. We can do that with append. I'm not going to show you that. The one that I think is a bit more trickier to get your head around is the merge command. Because what that does is add variables to the right, if you like. So add columns of data. So what we're going to do here is we're going to add the population for each country to our data set. So let's just say we scrape the numbers of people in these countries off the internet, and we want to add that into our data for some reason. We're going to do that using merge. First though, I'm going to get you to view the data set that you're about to add, just so it makes sense, but also to demonstrate a feature of STATA. Now STATA only lets us work with one dataset at a time. So what we're going to do is we're going to clear the dataset that we've already got in there. We're completely going to rub it out. Then we're going to read in a new one, so this population dataset. We're going to take a look at it, so browse it. And then we're going to clear that one out. And this is the part that I want you to take note of. We're going to run the whole of our do file to demonstrate that it doesn't matter if you lose a dataset. As long as you've put all the commands in your do file, you can recreate that dataset really, really quickly. So I'm going to use the command clear, and that'll clear the dataset. I'm then going to read in a .dta file, which is the population data. So a .dta file is the file used to store data in a STATA format, if you like. And then we're going to look at it. And what we're going to notice is that there's 4 extra countries in this file. So we've got China, India, Indonesia, and Brazil. And just notice also that the countries are in a different order to our original dataset. Then we're going to clear out that dataset, and we're going to highlight in our do file all those commands, starting with the import Excel command where we read in our data, right up until the last command we did, so that replaced GDP Europe, etc. And then we're just going to hit Control D and we'll get back to where we were before. Let's try that. So highlight clear, and you're about to see this disappear. But it's okay because we've got our do file so we can read it in. Then read in a new dataset. So this .dta, our population dataset. Let's have a little look at that so you understand what we're doing here. So there's all the populations. There you can see we've got China, India, Indonesia, Brazil, which are 4 that we don't have in our other dataset. So in this one we've got 40 instead of 36. Close that down. And then let's get rid of that one for now. So again, we've got nothing in here. So we want to get our original dataset back. So we're going to highlight all of the commands from this row right up until this row and press Ctrl D. So let me scroll up to the top of my do file, find that command, here it is, and I'm going to just highlight right the way down. Look out for, oh there we go, that one, that was the last one. Control D, there'll have been a browse command in there somewhere, so that's why I've got a browse window up. I'll close that. And then you can see we've got our data just as it looked before we cleared it out. So now we can merge our datasets together. This is the command merge. This one it indicates that there's more rows in the population dataset. So the 1 in this case represents the dataset we've already got in STATA, and the M represents the dataset that we're going to merge with it. And there could be cases where if you've got the same number of countries, let's say in both datasets, you'd put 1, 1. Or if you had more countries, more rows in the dataset already in STATA, you'd put M to 1. I think of the M as many, many more. And then we've got the word country, because that's the variable that we want STATA to use to match the rows. So we've got a variable country in our dataset in STATA, and we've got the variable country in our dataset population that we want to merge. Using is another command which is used to read a .dta file in, and then that's the name of the file. This population.dta is the name of the file that we want to add. And what STATA assumes is that you want to add to the data that's already in STATA. So let's just convince you that this dataset is going to change. This is our dataset as it is now. The last dataset is that GDP Europe. And in our do file, we've got this command here. So let's run merge. And you'll see in the output that it's told us how many rows were not matched. So that's those 4 extra countries. And then it gives us a breakdown of where they were not matched from. So it says in the master dataset, the dataset that was already in STATA, there's none that weren't matched. But from the one that was read in the use file, there was 4 countries that weren't matched. And it tells us that there's 36 matched. If we check that, you'll see what it's done to our data set. We've got this extra variable here, which is the populations of the countries, which is what we wanted. It also gives you a sort of report on how the merge went. And if you look down here, you'll see it's actually added those extra 4 countries as well. We can see that that's Brazil, China, India, and Indonesia. Another common thing is selecting data. Let's just say that we wanted to exclude a variable. I don't know, maybe we made it by mistake, or it's no longer useful to us. Let's just say we want to get rid of this region code 2. We use the command called drop. Another thing you might want to do is exclude some rows, so some observations. In our dataset, we've got 4 extra countries at the end, and that's rows 37 to 40. So this slash just sort of means 2. So drop in 37 to 40. If you want to only work with certain variables, we can use sort of the opposite, and we can specify the ones that we want to keep instead of the ones we want to drop. And here I've just listed the original variables that we read in. That's going to delete all the other variables. So let's have a play around doing that. Okay, so here's our region code 2 here. Run this, and it's disappeared. Then in our dataset, we've got these 4 countries here. In our do file, we've got this command which will get rid of those last 4 rows. We'll check that. There you go, they're disappeared. And then if we only wanted to keep some certain variables, we've just listed the names of those variables there. So we've got a lot of variables here we've built up from all our generating variables. If we run this, we'll see that it gets rid of them all, and we've just left with these ones. Now what I suggest you do at this point is save that data set as a DTA file. So after you've done all this cleaning of your data, you could use the do file to, every time you go into that dataset, clean it again, or you might just want to save the file as it is. The way we would do that is just use the command save. And what I've done here is I've not only named the file and given it the suffix .dta, I've also included the file pathway. So if I click Control D for that, and I'll prove to you that it's saved. Here we go. Here we've got a .dta file here, which is gdpdet, which wasn't there before. In the future, what you would do is use the command use, and that's going to read in that file. If you have, I call it data wrangling when you're cleaning your data, sometimes you do have problems because you can't exactly get Stata to do what you want it to. Make sure that you're clear on how you want to change that data. If you can't put it into words, then it'll make it harder to understand what you're trying to do. Sometimes you realise it's not possible to do what you're trying to do. So saying it out loud what you want to do can really help. And that can also help you decide what you Google to find out the code, to find help that you need. We've already saved our data. I'll leave it there. The next video, it covers making graphs.